The main character of the film, Enzo is hiding from the police after stealing expensive watches. In search of a hiding place, he finds a utility closet and opens it with his universal key. However, the police are nearby, and he is forced to hide in the water. When the authorities leave, Enzo tries to get out of the river, but accidentally falls into an old barrel filled with industrial waste, which drags him underwater. Crawling out of the river, covered in filth, Enzo starts coughing up a strange black liquid, and this continues all the way home. Upon arrival, he is feverish, but by morning he feels significantly better. After having yogurt for breakfast, Enzo heads to his neighbor Sergio to sell the watches. Sergio is connected to a local crime boss known as Gypsy. At a meeting with the criminal group, Gypsy proposes a robbery plan, but not everyone agrees. One of the members expresses his disagreement, and Gypsy, without hesitation, strikes him, showing his ruthlessness. Sergio invites Enzo to join the criminal operation to make some money. Unfamiliar with the gang members and their leader, Enzo agrees to help Sergio. When they return home, it's revealed that Sergio has a daughter, Alesia, who is immersed in her own world of cartoons. She believes she is a princess, and that a character from the cartoon Steel Jack is real. Sergio explains that after her mother's death, Alesia lost touch with reality and now constantly watches cartoons on her tablet, and if it's taken away she throws tantrums and becomes aggressive. During the job, Sergio and Enzo pick up two guys and take them to a construction site. Sergio begins preparing a laxative to extract the necessary contraband from them, but one of the guys suddenly dies. The second one seizes the moment, grabs Sergio's gun and shoots him. Sergio manages to land a blow but is shot multiple times, with one bullet hitting Enzo, causing him to fall from a great height. Miraculously, Enzo survives and, despite everything, goes home. Meanwhile, Gypsy, the gang leader, performs a solo act for the heads of the largest criminal organization. Sergio was supposed to deliver important goods for them, but after his disappearance, Gypsy decides not to inform the bosses about what happened. When Enzo returns home, he meets Sergio's daughter, who persistently asks where her father is. Not knowing the answer, Enzo says he has no idea. The girl doesn't leave him alone, continuing to ask questions, and eventually sits by the door, hoping for an answer. Enzo, pulled away from his favorite activities, watching movies and eating yogurt, loses his patience. Irritated by her persistence, he punches through the door. Alesia gets scared and runs away, but Enzo, realizing his incredible strength, begins testing it. He easily moves a cabinet with one hand and even bans a radiator. That same night, Enzo decides to test his abilities in real conditions. He heads to an ATM and rips it out of the wall. With the money he gets, Enzo buys a whole pack of yogurts and new discs with his favorite movies. In addition to superhuman strength, Enzo discovers that his body has astonishing regeneration. His bullet wound heals completely in less than a day. Meanwhile, Gypsy and his gang come to Alesia to interrogate her about her father's whereabouts. Alesia claims that her father was kidnapped by the Emperor of Fire. Enzo watches from a distance and signals to Alesia not to mention him. Gypsy notices Enzo and orders him to leave, then drags the girl into the apartment to interrogate her again. The gang members begin to threaten her, but suddenly, Enzo crashes through the window and starts beating them one by one. Gypsy takes Alesia hostage, demanding that Enzo let his men go in exchange for her life. Before leaving, Gypsy manages to cut off one of Enzo's toes. Back home with Alesia, Enzo tries to tape the toe back on with duct tape. Alesia, seeing Enzo as her favorite superhero from cartoons named Jack, believes his mission is to save her and find her father. However, Enzo has no desire to play the role of a hero. That night, Alesia falls asleep without clothes, which makes Enzo uncomfortable. In the morning, he discovers that the toe has not reattached. Enzo decides to find out if Alesia has any relatives and eventually leaves her at the shelter where her father often left her. Meanwhile, the surveillance footage of Enzo ripping an ATM out of a wall goes viral on the internet. Enzo finds a plan in Sergio's documents for robbing an armored truck, which had been developed by Gypsy and his gang. However, Enzo decides to do the job himself, beating them to it. Later, the police bring Alesia back after she runs away from the shelter to find her superhero. In the meantime, Enzo improves his apartment by buying a projector and cartoons about the superhero Jake, Alesia's favorite character. While watching, she takes his hand. Enzo, trying to get closer to her, pushes her tablet aside, which causes her to panic. Alesia starts screaming and banging her head against the wall, but Enzo manages to calm her down. She eventually confesses that her father used to hurt her when she was a child. The next day, Enzo decides to help Alesia save her father, playing the role of the superhero Jake. They go to a park, where Enzo takes her on a Ferris wheel ride, fulfilling her dream. Meanwhile, an old friend of Gypsy's tries to leave the gang, but he doesn't get far. At a shopping mall, Enzo buys Alesia a beautiful dress that looks like a princess gown. Alesia is so excited by the gift that she invites Enzo to join her in the fitting room. At that moment, she confesses that her heart starts racing when he's around. She then decides to kiss him first. Enzo responds to her tenderness, but in a moment of passion, he crosses the line and becomes too aggressive. Alesia doesn't like it and feels uncomfortable. Afterward, they both silently return home. Soon after, Alesia becomes upset with Enzo, accusing him of doing nothing to save her father. Enzo in turn responds harshly, telling her that her father is already dead. Upset and disappointed, Alesia leaves and boards a tram. However, Enzo, overcoming his emotions, openly approaches the tram to stop it and steps inside. He sincerely apologizes for his behavior, admitting that he has never had experience with women and doesn't know how to act properly. He asks Alesia to teach him and promises to take her to her father. Alesia, touched by his confession, agrees. Meanwhile, Gypsy and his associate run into trouble with their bosses, leading to a fierce shootout. In the end, only the female boss and Gypsy survive. Returning to his hideout, Gypsy finds that all his men are dead and Enzo is now on TV, no longer hiding his face. Alesia and her companion decide to escape to another city. They stop at a small hotel, where Enzo tells her about the tragic events of his past, particularly how all his friends die. Alesia realizes she left her tablet behind, but despite this she tells Enzo that she no longer needs it because they will always be together now. They are preparing to spend the night together, but suddenly, Gypsy bursts into their room and shoots Enzo with a tranquilizer. When Enzo wakes up, he finds himself completely paralyzed. Gypsy has taken Alesia hostage and promises to release her if Enzo tells him the secret of his strength. Enzo, Alesia, and Gypsy arrive at the riverbank, where Enzo shares his story. At that moment, Alesia decides to act and kills one of Gypsy's henchmen. She runs away, but soon Gypsy's bosses arrive and open fire. Alesia is wounded, and Gypsy is set on fire with a flamethrower, falling into the river. Before leaving, Alesia convinces Enzo that he needs to step up as a hero and save them all. The next morning, Gypsy, still not fully recovered from his burns, crawls out of the river. He applies makeup to cover his wounds and begins taking revenge on his enemies, recording everything on video. In the end, he announces that he plans to carry out a massive explosion. Meanwhile, Enzo, seeing a little girl in danger on the road, rushes to her rescue and saves her. The girl's grateful mother expresses her deep appreciation, and at that moment Enzo realizes that a good deed can make a big difference. Enzo sees Gypsy's announcement on TV and understands that he must stop him. He breaks into the stadium and confronts him. The fight is evenly matched, and the opponent activates the timer. Enzo decides to take the device away and throw it into the river, but the villain interferes again. In the end, they both fall into the river along with the bomb. The explosion kills the villain, but the people are saved. The news reports reveal divided opinions in society. Some consider Enzo a hero, while others see him as a criminal. In the final scene, Enzo puts on a mask that Alesia made for him, inspired by her favorite superhero, and jumps down. The movie ends here. Thanks for watching, and see you on our channel.